I made a multiplayer action RPG that I've been working on for almost 2 years now. It was a very ambitious project, but surprisingly, we're pulling it off. In this video, I'm going to talk about everything from multiplayer systems to my overall experience with making a game that's taken almost 2 years, working a full-time job while you're working on a game, all these things, and maybe you'll find some of it interesting. So it's going to be a bit of a longer one, so strap in. I'm a 26-year-old software developer from Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I have a degree in computer science. I've also started a virtual reality company, which is now sold a few years ago. Aside from that, I've done many projects game-related, but I've never been able to commit to anything for longer than, let's say, 4 months at a time, until Sinderfury came along. So let's talk about why. It all started when I was working a corporate software job, and I was pretty unhappy with it. I decided to start looking for a new job because I really got tired of just not liking my job every day. I finally found a job that looked very promising. The people were great, and the interview went fantastic until the technical portion. I absolutely bombed the technical portion of the interview. This was very crushing for me because of all the work that I did for my side projects. I could not believe that I was still bombing technical interviews. Was I not past that? I'd been working on side projects for 5 years at this point, but they were all in Blender and CGI related and game related. And you can't always just jump into a random job interview and expect to completely blow past it. But I didn't know that at the time. So I decided what I needed to do was pick up a project that I can work on the side that would strengthen me up as a coder and give me more confidence in myself that I know I can do hard things with code that I had not done before. And so you might be able to guess what this thing actually was. Yep, you guessed right. It was a multiplayer game. After playing games like Monster Hunter, Dark Souls, New World, and other action RPG staples for years, I decided that I wanted to make a game where boss fights were definitely the main attraction. As a kid, I used to play Monster Hunter with my friend on PSP, and we had insane amounts of fun farming bosses, getting new gear, and pretty much going on adventures. I want to recreate that kind of experience that we had, but on PC. And I also want to add in a few more elements from games that I currently love today, like World of Warcraft, League of Legends, for their ability system. This is where Sinderfury started to sort of take shape. I had an idea of what I wanted to make, and now we have to try to make it happen. The concept has developed a fair bit over time, but essentially Sinderfury is a time trial dungeon crawler that guarantees a boss fight at the end of each dungeon. We've taken a lot of inspiration from Diablo and World of Warcraft mythics for the way the game is supposed to flow. The competitive nature in the game comes from the way dungeons are timed and what kind of loot you're actually expecting to get from the time you achieve. The faster you clear a dungeon, the better the loot. So the loot actually scales with your clear speed, and this is where the competitive nature of the game starts to build on itself. Because of the ability system and the open class system, you can actually customize your build in many different ways, and you're not actually locked into any class in particular. Each weapon that you equip comes with 2 abilities that you have to use, but the next 4 slots are completely up to you, and you can take from any skill tree you want. What we want players to be doing is thinking about how to optimize their build to work the best with their team, so that they can try to experiment to get faster times in the dungeon. When they get faster times, they get better loot, and it's sort of snowballs on itself. Now, in the game's current state, if you don't put any thought into what you're doing, you'll probably get destroyed, and you might not like it very much. But if you spend even a little bit of time thinking about your build and thinking about strategy, the game will start to open up, and you'll realize that it's actually not hard at all, but in fact it might even be too easy because of how much you can do. And that's okay in a PvE game. Sometimes rewarding players for the thought they put in, I realized, is a pretty good thing actually, and a lot of people like that. So that's the current state of the game. Now that the vision for the game was much more clear, we had to actually try to figure out what to do about multiplayer, because that was the whole point after all. Luckily, we found a tutorial series by a man of the name Tom Wayland on YouTube. Now, this tutorial series was amazing to do as someone who didn't know any multiplayer at all. I followed this tutorial series for a few weeks. We actually ended up getting something running where we could play in the same lobby together. Of course, there were problems all over the place, but the point was that we were starting to uncover the magic. We were starting to pull back the curtains a little bit. But there was a main problem. Despite pulling back the curtains on multiplayer, I started to realize that ignorance may have been bliss before to code a multiplayer game by myself. I realized how much work it was to even code a simple thing in multiplayer. Because of the way that it has to be implemented, there are a lot more steps to even making a simple item drop or performing an attack and having the rest of your lobby actually see it. So I decided it was time to go to Reddit and pretty much anywhere else I could possibly find and try to find a a more permanent team member to join me making Sinderfury. I went to r/I-need-a-team on Reddit, and after scheming through dozens of people who decided they wanted to work for me and then never do anything, I finally found someone who actually looked promising. This person is a senior developer. They were wanting to code a game. Once again, they've coded games before. We ended up meeting up and we just started working. It's been a year and a half since that happened, so it worked out pretty well. That was a pretty lucky thing to happen. After they joined the team, they also pointed out another major issue. So I'm going to start getting a little bit technical here, but bear with me. I have to for the explanation. So the problem that our new developer pointed out to me was that our multiplayer code was not compatible with Steam API. Now what this means is that we want to put our game on Steam and we want people to play it on Steam and be able to open the game, invite friends, use Steam lobbies. Well, our multiplayer code was all made from scratch, and so it doesn't use Steam lobbies or anything like that. And so we would have needed a custom launcher, and the game wouldn't have been able to go on Steam. You're getting the point. There's a big rabbit hole to this. And so rather than try to fix what we currently had to work with Steam, we picked a new API that this developer had experience with called Mirror. And it didn't take very long to switch. It was a bit of a learning process, but once I already understood what was happening in multiplayer, it wasn't as bad as I thought. In fact, there are a lot of things about our new Mirror API that are way easier than what we were doing before. So I'm going to go into an explanation about what multiplayer actually is in games. If you don't want to hear this, you can skip over it, but I recommend sticking around. It's not going to be too technical, and I'm going to try to give you a basic idea of what multiplayer actually is in a game. Alright, so we are going to carefully go through how multiplayer works, not on necessarily a technical level, but I want you to understand what you're looking at when you play a multiplayer game. So the idea behind Mirror, at the very least, when you are at home on your computer and you're pushing buttons away, buttons, and you're playing your little game, what you are looking at is your local instance of the game, okay? At some place, there is a server processing things that you are pressing and game events, and so your little local instance is there to help you navigate through the world. It's to help you see the other players and yourself. But your own character is the only local thing that you're seeing on your screen. Everything else is basically an illusion. Now, what do I mean by this? Let's put you in a lobby with one other person, an empty room. Imagine a multiplayer game and it's just an empty room, but there's one other person with you. So you are playing on your computer and that's your local instance, but the person that you are looking at in your game is not actually the other guy's local instance. That's a dummy. It's a mimic. That is a mimic character that is simply there to match the other guy's local instances, animations, and particle effects. It has no brain at all. All it does is look at the other guy's local instance, try to match it so that you can see what he's doing in your local instance. Okay, so try to wrap your head around that. Basically, you're not seeing anyone's local instance ever. You're in a lobby by yourself, but you can see other people. Those are all mimics. They're all mimic players. They're just copying what their local instances are doing. And this is how multiplayer essentially works. It's an illusion. You're not in a lobby with anyone. You're in a lobby with yourself and a bunch of other mimics of people. If you're in a lobby with 2 people, the server actually has to create 4 players, which means it has to create your local player. It has to create a mimic of you for the other guy's local player so that he can see you. And it has to do the same for him. It has to create his local player and then a mimic of him so that you can see his local player, okay? So this is kind of confusing, but once you understand this, you basically understand the foundation of how all multiplayer games work. So now that you understand multiplayer, we'll get back to the story. Basically, we did all those things that I just talked about, but in our new multiplayer system, and it now works with the Steam API. So we can now join each other's lobbies through Steam, and it works a lot better. All we have left to do at this point is code the rest of the game. And so fast forward a year and a half. What did we do in the last year and a half? Well, we coded an ability system. We so far have 3 polished dungeons with 3 different bosses to use. We have 8 weapons. We have 25 abilities. The list goes on. We've been working hard to get all this content in the game, and there's still a lot more to go. But most of our core systems are actually done. And so all we have left to do really, duplicate systems that already exist into new dungeons, create new maps, new meshes, new animations, add a few new abilities, of course, infinite amounts of bug fixing. So we're actually on a roll here. So we've been working, we've been on this long journey. It's been almost 2 years. What do I actually do now? We have a game that works pretty well, but it's not finished. We've got tons of work left to do. We picked a release date, and it's going to release early access in March of next year. Before that, there is the Steam Next Fest, which normally happens around February. This is a great thing to join, but you have to join it before your launch, ideally within a period of 2 to 3 months or even less, because you want to build up some momentum for your launch, and the Steam Next Fest is one of the only things that indie developers can reliably get into. So you should remember that for your own game. Before that, we're going to do a Kickstarter, probably at the same time as the Steam Next Fest, to draw people into it, and they both sort of feed off of each other. Or we're going to do it before it. But we're not going to do this huge goal, we need $100,000 to finish the game. The game is going to come out no matter what. We've already done the bulk of the work. We have some money to spend on the game. What we need is exposure, and getting a Kickstarter onto the front page is definitely good exposure. The money will definitely go back into the game. If we can raise any amount of money, it will correlate to new features that we'd love to add if there's interest. Otherwise, we just want to do a Kickstarter for exposure. And so we're going to set the goal to a super low amount of money. We're going to be completely transparent about the fact that the game is coming out regardless of whether or not you donate us money. But if you want to see more content in the game, that's where that money is going to go. And so until then, we're basically just pounding through dungeons, bug fixes, play tests, everything you can imagine to try to get the game ready for Steam Next Fest and of course for the final early access release. And so that pretty much sums up the last 2 years of game development. It's been a crazy journey. I'm tired, but I'm very optimistic about our journey forward, regardless of whether or not our game does well at launch, because I think we're just going to keep making more games. It's been such a crazy experience making this one. I think we have a lot more to offer to this industry, and I would encourage other indie devs to feel the same. There is a ton of money going around in this industry, and there are a lot of companies who are not producing good games, and we owe it to ourselves and our friends and other people if we think we have what it takes to make a game. You go out there and you give it a shot. I'll see you in the next one.